What impact does this most recent election have on the criminal justice reform movement? What's the future look like for the movement? We're here to answer that and other pressing questions is Jeffrey Clayton. Mr. Clayton is the executive director of the American Bail Coalition. What is that organization? Can you tell our viewers about it, sir?
Absolutely. It's a trade association of insurance companies who underwrite criminal bail bondsmen throughout the United States. So we work on pretrial justice issues primarily.
Okay, so what does the future hold? Does this election have some impact on criminal justice reform?
I think so. I think you're going to continue to see relaxing requirements for defendants, whether it be not making them post bail, or what I think we're seeing a lot of is getting rid of policies that deny people's right to bail. And then the other thing that we're seeing is a big movement against the supervision of defendants prior to them being convicted of a crime. And a recent report was just released by Arnold Ventures that basically indicates that supervising defendants before they're convicted really has little impact on public safety, and defendants often pay for that. So I think requirements for defendants, at least when it comes to local policies.
Well, I wonder what your view is on that. There are tons of people, I understand about 400,000 people who are in jail right now who can't raise enough money to get out on bail. What do you think of cash bonds and all those things?
Well, I think in light of what happened in California, the rejection of Proposition 25 and the no money bail system by voters is that voters want to keep their right to bail. So I think the issue is going to pivot a little bit from just eliminating bail to other issues of, there's more than 400,000 people who are just being denied bail altogether. And of course, then people who are getting out are being supervised by the state and having to pay for it themselves. So I think, you're going to continue to see a movement against cash bail, but I think it's going to be a little bit more than that going forward, and we'll start looking at other solutions.
Well, do you think that cash bail should be revoked, the whole position of it, or not?
I don't personally. I think the right to bail is a fundamental constitutional right, and that's what voters in California told us is they want to keep it. Should we reduce pretrial detention? Yes. Should we look for alternatives for people who can't afford bail? Yes. Should we review bails where people stay in jail too long? Yes. Should we have other reforms that stop languishing in jail? Yes. And so it is a problem that needs to be solved. I'm just not sure elimination is the answer.
But isn't it tough for some people to raise that kind of money? And if you can't raise the bail, what happens to your job? Do you lose that? Does it break up the family? What happens when you can't go bail?
Well, typically what people do is they'll plead. But yeah, it can have a destabilizing impact on your life. But I'd argue that the rest of the criminal justice system is the arrest in the first place and taking people to jail in the first place. And if truly people believe that people don't belong there, I think we should just stop arresting people for certain crimes in the first place. And I think really the big problem has been these low-level cases where it just feels and probably is fundamentally unfair to having people sitting in jail on low-level bails that pretty much anybody in the United States, but for a small percentage of indigent people.
And would that include traffic offenses, or what sort of crimes do you think they shouldn't go to jail for?
Well, obviously, in some parts of this country, you can go to jail. You can be in jail and be arrested for crimes for which jail is no potential penalty. So I think that is a problem, is getting rid of penalties on low-level offenses that would make them arrestable offenses in the first place. Because the reality is, serving 1 or 2 days in jail or 3 days in jail really is not that significant of a penalty for some of these small level crimes. And I think, the answer is just to make them more of like a civil infraction and not a jailable offense in the first place.
I look at Kyle Rittenhouse and how he was able to raise money online to go $2 million in bail. But there are a lot of people who can't do that kind of thing, who are accused of far less crimes than he is accused of, killing 2 people. How do we distinguish between what someone is charged with and whether or not they should get bail or not, and if they're a danger to society and public safety?
Well, this whole charitable bail, raising bail for other people, is a big movement right now. $100 million was raised for various organizations, $35 million in Minneapolis after the George Floyd incident. And so I think, regulation of that and looking at who can post bail for somebody else, is an issue. I don't personally think we should go to a system of preventative detention of just saying this guy does not get bail whatsoever, because it'll be used against political opponents. So, I think it's an issue that we need to look at of people raising bails online and using corporate funds to post bails. But, the reality is that, protesters and all kinds of people were bailed out by the $100 million that's been injected into bail funds. And we're not putting that much of a spotlight on the issues we're seeing there, which are plentiful.
Well, as an insurance person who looks at bail bondsmen, are you afraid that people will skip and forfeit the bail, and will that cost you?
It won't, because we're not posting these. These bails are being posted in cash. And hilariously, what we found out yesterday was that in Portland, the charity's posting the defendant's cash, and then defendants are keeping it when they get it back. And so there's issues. The other thing is that they're keeping the charitable bail funds for fines, fees, costs, restitution, and surcharges, which shouldn't be happening. But the way the system is set up to siphon people's money is that even the charities who are posting bonds for people are having their money taken to pay the state and use bail as a collections mechanism, which we think is wrong.
You mentioned Portland and California. I understand in Georgia they passed a law that's going to take effect in January of next year that's going to limit whether or not people can get out on bail. Do you think that these kinds of strict enforcement policies and laws are needed?
Just to let the judges handle it unconstrained. I think when the legislators start coming in and saying these group of people are the bad people, or these group of people are the good people, or using a risk assessment to distinguish between people, is where we get into problems. And I think judges just need to look at people. And I think putting specific things in the law is probably a problem, and maybe it's going a little bit too far.
Do you think that some of these laws take away a judge's discretion in a particular case, ties their hands?
Yeah, and we've seen that on both sides, either saying, like in New York, you can't do bail in these cases where judges would want to do bail, or saying you must do bail in these cases. Also in New York, when they had $1 felony bails going around because you had to do a bail. So I think, the best thing to do is let judges look at the person, the criminal history, their financial ability to pay, and all that sort of thing, and make a decision. And anytime we start tying the hands of judges, I think we handcuff judges from doing the job that they're supposed to be doing.
How well do those bail supervision programs work where somebody has to be wearing a bracelet? I understand that in Chicago, there was one guy who had 3 children that his mother-in-law was keeping. She had a medical emergency. He left the house to go pick the kids up because there was no one else there to take care of them. And the next day, the police came to his house and arrested him because the warning system went off. What about those kind of supervision programs? Is there room for improvement?
There's huge room for improvement. And as I said earlier, the Arnold Foundation just released a report saying they don't improve public safety, which means we're charging defendants, we're putting for their own supervision, they're paying for their own dragnet, and we're not getting better results. And so I think what we've learned from that criminal process of punishment and probation after that it just doesn't make sense to do that. And it's bankrupting defendants. Defendants are paying for it. I mean, you look at Indianapolis, they don't even know how much defendants are being charged. They just let the vendor charge them. And they don't have a policy really that they're implementing for indigent defendants. So if you can't afford your bail, you probably can't afford your supervision either.
And then you're just going to stay locked up. And who knows what happens? You lose your job or anything else. Who knows what happens after that?
Yeah, as the Colorado Public Defender said, really what we're doing is setting people up to fail in the pretrial context, which is bad because then that's going to affect how they're going to plead to the ultimate charge, right? And that's not a post-conviction sentence that they're violating. It's a command. And in Colorado, for example, it could be don't have a beer. And if you have one beer, all of a sudden you've committed another felony just because you've been falsely accused of the first felony. So it can have a devastating impact. And we just need to move these cases forward and not if we care about the presumption of innocence, we can't put people on probation before they're convicted.
I understand COVID-19 has really impaired the judicial system and cases are backing up everywhere. Does this affect bail also?
It does, because you have people on bail longer, which means, there's the potential that they'll fail longer. We've had impacts of not being able to return suspects to jail that normally jails would take due to COVID emergencies. We had a jail down in Southwest Missouri where 1 out of 2 inmates had COVID, and obviously they're not going to take new people in. So it's been a real challenge for people in the bail world to deal with COVID, and it's been jurisdiction by jurisdiction. It's been all different.
And I understand jails are hotbeds, petri dishes for COVID-19, not only for the prisoners, but for the correction officers and other personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the one thing they tell you not to do is be indoors in close quarters. And so I hope that, you know, the vaccine will be delivered, you know, to those populations first, because, I mean, they're vulnerable and there's really nothing they can do about it. And the government has a duty to protect people when they're in the custody of the government. And it's questionable as to whether, you know, they can do that right now effectively.
All right, Jeffrey Clayton, Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition, thank you very much. We appreciate your time and your expertise, sir.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Stay healthy. I'm Chris Moore. Our program will continue in just a moment.